Thank you very much. Indeed, I'm going to talk about research that I did about anti-Semitic social media conversations among the far right. Now, if we speak about the far right in regard to the United States of America, we talk about a group that is politically targeted by Donald Trump, who has, as we all know, presented himself as this pro-Israel figure. So what I was really looking into is the question how the anti-Semitism that we have among the far right plays out in regard to this pro-Israelism that is part of Donald Trump's platform. Before I really go into this issue, I will just say in a remark that I would be super cautious to take claims of pro-Israelism or friendship with Israel among the far right at face value. By the way, I would say the same for the left. I mean, I've been confronted with violent anti-Semitism on the left that came after a prelude of declarations of friendship towards Israel and the Jewish people. So yeah, we also have that on the left, but today I'm talking about the right. And on the right, that specifically means, or in some of the cases I came across, that friendship or support for Israel seems to refer to an idea of Israel that has very little to do with the real existing state of Israel, or at least the country where I've been living for the most part, for the last 20 years. And that is predicated on an idea of Israel that is surprisingly similar or based on the kind of anti-Semitic stereotypes that many of us would much more expect among the left, meaning framing Israel as a racist apartheid state. Now, the difference really is that on the left, this idea of Israel as a racist apartheid state is often used, or it's basically used to demonize Israel. What I observed a lot on the right is that people subscribe to the same image. Yeah, Israel is somehow ethno-state, racist apartheid state, but then it's reevaluated positively, meaning Israel is put up, or this idea of Israel is being put up as a utopian model for an ethno-state that far-right people in Great Britain or the United States would like to see established. Now, I'm not saying this pertains to all images of Israel among the far right. I'm not even saying it's a majority, but it's definitely a narrative I came across. And this is the reason when I'm talking about pro-Israel, it's a tricky term. It's really a question what it means. And I'm says it explicitly. I'm not going to go into it or evaluate the merit of claims of pro-Israeliness. What is really important for the purpose of the presentation here is that this label is out there. And what I'm, really going to focus on is a discourse among the far right that, based on anti-Semitic belief, expresses dissatisfaction with Trump's pro-Israel positioning, interpreting it as a betrayal of the far right. And okay, let me get the PowerPoint presentation going. Right, so, okay, I just have to put that down here. I have to organize my Zoom a little bit. This is an image that I downloaded from Facebook, from an open group. So we're not talking about some fringe, hardcore far-right social media platform. This is from a Facebook profile that has the name Open Borders for Israel. Now, I guess some people are more familiar, some people are less familiar with all these codes that we have in social media. So I just want to explain a few things about this image. First of all, Open Borders for Israel is a hashtag. I assume most people know what a hashtag is. It's kind of a headline or a kind of a summary of a topic or a position that is being talked about over and over again in all areas of social media. And it's basically a code for an idea on the lines of the white genocide conspiracy theory. Unfortunately, I missed some of the previous panels because I had an internet problem. I'm sure the idea of the white genocide conspiracy theory came up before. It's the idea that Jews /Israel /Zionism are conspiring purposely in order to orchestrate immigration from non-white countries into white countries in order to conduct a genocide of the white race, to whatever that is, to exterminate the white race. So Open Borders for Israel really codes the accusation that Israel is behind this. Israel orchestrates this immigration into other countries while really closing its own borders, right? So Israel, that's how the accusation goes, establishes itself as an ethno-state while preventing other countries from doing the same. And therefore, the demand open the borders for Israel. That's what this hashtag really means. Now, we see the headline, we see this Donald Trump image, and it says like he betrayed white America because he wants closed borders just for Israel and not for other countries. And it's like a direct accusation that he basically betrayed his anti-immigration platform. And what is interesting here, we see in the bottom left corner, we see this meme of Caper the Frog, which may be familiar to some, but it really became like a symbol of the alt-right movement associated with Breitbart and Steve Bannon and all these organizations and people. And we see Caper the Frog crying. So it's like basically Donald Trump has betrayed the far right because he sides with Israel instead of with his anti-immigration agenda, which are pitted against each other, and therefore Caper the Frog is mourning. So the punchline here really is, for people who believe that Zionism and Israel are behind non-white immigration into the United States and behind so-called globalism, we've heard this term like many times today, Trump's pro-Israel posture must appear as a betrayal of his anti-immigration and anti-globalist campaign promise. And this is an integral part, or basically the basis of the conflict that I will address today. So since we're, after all, on the social media panel, I should say like a few things about my methodology. And as most people have already recognized, in contrast to my other fellow presenters on this panel, my concern or my approach is less to study social media dynamics as such, but rather to use social media data in order to drive conclusions about certain forms and adaptations of anti-Semitic discourse. And there are some big benefits to using social media data for this end. And one of them is that social media in this respect is practically free of reactive bias. In contrast to interview data that we could gather, or like in contrast to survey data, social media data has not been generated. It's not like a response to researcher intervention. Social media data is generated. It's the own initiative of the authors who write the contributions, and they give us like a very authentic window into what people really think and feel. And this is really not my insight, and I really want to give credit here to Monika Schwarz-Friesel, who I was like lucky to have among my mentors, and who has showed many times in her own research that internet data and social media data can very productively be used in order to win insights about anti-Semitic discourse. And I think that also relates to what Günther said before about like the benefits of, or like the possibilities of social media research, and what Eyal said like in the very beginning when he introduced this panel. Now, another big advantage of social media research in this context is that it gives us access to grassroots sentiments. And the third one is that if we study political thought or worldviews at hand of more traditional sources, let's say like political writing or political propaganda, we can never be quite sure how the messages are being decoded by the recipients, by the readers, or by the people who look at it. Now here, social media is really a game changer because it allows us to view in real time how discussions about certain contexts and postings, unfold. And that allows us really to make very valid statements about the meaning of certain messages. And if we look back at the images that I showed before, we see like a semiotically like a complex message. We see all these symbols, all these hashtags, like Pape is a frog. This is all like semiotically extremely complex. So how do we know that the interpretation is right? And the answer is we can follow the conversation, the discussion about them, and can like say with a relative degree of certainty how these messages and how these images and how these codes are really being decoded. So that much for the methodological side and for the benefit of about the benefit of social media research in discovering anti-Semitic sentiments or studying them. So I would like to get back to the heart of the matter and talk a bit about Donald Trump and his self-presentation as pro-Israel and how that plays out. I mean, the only reason why I made this funny collage here of newspaper articles is just like really to make the point, regardless how any of us would evaluate Donald Trump's policies in terms of really being pro-Israel or not, it's how he comes across. It's how he has been presenting himself. It's how it's seen by much of the press, by much of the public, and also by much of the far right. And this self-presentation as being pro-Israel certainly was instrumental for Donald Trump in mobilizing political support. And we're talking here, of course, not only, but to a very significant extent about the evangelical community that has a very high stake or very large stake in the American electorate. I think it was, according to Ph.D, about 20% in the 2016 elections, 19% in the 2020 elections. And they were very clear in articulating the expectations towards Donald Trump to be pro-Israeli, again, whatever that means. So this is one source of political support. But there's another one. And in this, Donald Trump is really not different to any other far-right leader anywhere in Europe or in the Western world. And this source of support is catering to anti-globalism or this anti-globalist sentiment, meaning like this fear that some kind of progressive force, global progressive force, undermines traditional schemes of culture and collective identity. And we heard that before in the previous presentations. This force is very often associated with Jews. It's a platform that typically, and again, this is not exclusive to Donald Trump, but characteristic for the far right everywhere in the world, that caters to sentiments of parochial forms of collective identity, and indeed racism featuring very strong among them. And electoral analysis shows that the catering to racist sentiments was a very crucial factor in mobilizing support for Donald Trump. Now, as we see, or as we like mentioned before, this racism often comes with accusations that Jews are trying to destroy racial or right identity, because we spoke about the white genocide conspiracy theory, Israel, open border for Israel. We saw this before. So if Israel is all behind that, and like orchestrating the scheme of immigration, and it's like conducting this plot to exterminate the right ways, how really can Donald Trump be pro-Israel? And here we see the sentiment like very clearly articulated. This is from a post from the Gap social media platform. By the way, I didn't say that before in the methodology section, but I collected my data from everywhere. Like I used both mainstream social media platforms like Facebook and Twitter, but also like Gap, like a classical example for what came to be called alt-tech social media, like this group of fringe social media platforms that serve as a refuge for content that like get banned from the mainstream platforms. So we really have this idea here that pro-Israel has to be like anti-white, because like Israel is like in this business of like destroying the white race. And problems are part of the problem that is imagined in the lines of the white genocide conspiracy theory. So yeah, pro-Israel is anti-white, and this is like a sentiment that pretty much pits Donald Trump's pro-Israelism against like other parts of his platform that makes this racist and anti-immigration and anti-globalist appeals. And this leads simply to the perception among people who subscribe to these views that Donald Trump is a traitor and that he serves Israeli interests rather than American interests. And by the way, this picture has been posted by the same profile that has posted this picture here, so we can really put these things in context. Now, I do want to talk a little more about the white genocide conspiracy theory that is basically the underlying theme here, even though it has been mentioned before. I'm going to show a picture that is not easy to see, and I really debated with myself whether I should show it. But I think like we're here like in a closed forum, and I think we can really make a statement about this. So this is the image, terribly vulgar image that, however, illustrates very clear the punchline of the white genocide conspiracy theory. We see this like terrible caricatures, like this really demeaning, disrespectful caricatures of people who like obviously symbolize non-white immigrants, and they're like in the business of like contaminating this wonderful Aryan European gene pool. And then we obviously see this caricature of a Jew who's joining them, but he's not just joining them, he's orchestrating it. And he's telling these immigrants, come here and contaminate the European gene pool, destroy the white race. This is really my plan. So I think we can really very clearly see two things. One thing, I took this like from a website called the Anti-Zionist League, right? So we really see how like Zionism and Israel and Jews in anti-Semitic narratives are really used interchangeably, right? I mean, all this talk, anti-Semitism is not, anti-Zionism is not anti-Semitism. This is simply like a discourse that is detached from the edge discourse, right? This is like a website called Anti-Zionist League, and these terms are being used interchangeable. And of course, these forms of anti-Zionism are just like another expression of anti-Semitism, which, by the way, you know, this idea only exists among the left, that like anti-Zionism is this kind of like masquerade like for the left, but we see like it also occurs among the right. They also like use Israel and Zionism instead of Jews in order to get across their anti-Semitic messages. But the other thing that's really interesting here, and which is like the real reason why I'm showing this picture, is that I really think by combining racism and anti-Semitism, it really shows the difference between these 2 points of bias, right? And we can really see, on the one hand, we have these immigrants that are simply like a nuisance and like to contaminate this gene pool. But then we have the Jew who are orchestrated. So we have on the one hand like racism and anti-immigration sentiments as this kind of like xenophobic grievance, and then on the other hand, anti-Semitism as a conspiracy theory. And I think I saw like Professor Herf is here, like among the people in this in the audience, and he made this point brilliantly in terms like to Nazi Germany when he compared the attitude of the Nazis towards the Poles as with the attitude towards the Jews. And I think we see the same thing here, right? It's two different things. It's like immigration, racism as a nuisance, as a xenophobic grievance, as opposed to anti-Semitism as a conspiracy theory, as the Jews are really the plotters behind this whole thing. So what I'm showing here is a quote from a movie that went viral on social media in 2015. It's called With Open Gates, and in this movie, Nick Griffin, British National Party MEP, is being quoted, and like the narrative of the new movie is pretty much summarized by this quote, where it says, Nick Griffin says that Zionist supremacists have schemed to promote immigration and miscegenation with the deliberate aim of weeding us out of existence in our own homelands. Now, the reason why I'm showing this here is that this movie has been posted in 2018 or has been shared on social media by Republican Congresswoman Marjorie Taylor Greene, who, as we all know, is one of the staunchest supporters of Donald Trump. Now, She may have taken it down from her social media account. She may have even apologized. I don't know. I'm not showing that to point the finger at her. I'm simply showing it like as a piece of evidence to show that this really makes inroads among Donald Trump supporters, and to explain this conflict between anti-Semitic views and pro-Israel attitudes that we have among Trump supporters. So we may say, to summarize, in between, figures on the far right blame Jews, Israel, and Zionism precisely for those grievances about globalism, race, and immigration that Donald Trump's platform has been promising to fix. In this light, Donald Trump's pro-Israelism appears as a betrayal of his campaign promise. And since Trump continues to compete for influence in the Republican Party, I think it will be very interesting to follow how this conflict between pro-Israel attitude and anti-Semitically underpinned racism and anti-immigration attitudes is going to play out in the future. Now, so far, I've showed like the conflict between these two positions, and like another point that I believe is just as interesting is how discourse on the far right is trying to bring these positions together again and to reconcile them and to maintain support for Donald Trump despite his grievances about his pro-Israelism. And there are some very interesting rhetorical techniques, and I would like to illustrate these at hand of a conversation that developed on YouTube further to a video that framed Donald Trump as a Zionist traitor. So I'm going to go with you through some of the comments. There were like thousands of comments on this thread. I just picked out a few, and I want you to show how this conversation evolved in order, in the end, to make this point how competing positions are being reconciled. So, and please keep in mind, all this is in response to a movie or like to a video that frames Donald Trump as a Zionist traitor. So we have a comment here that says like, what gets me is all those voices on the alternative right are still trying to say Trump is on our side. They either know they are working to benefit the international Jew or just plain stupid. I believe the former. Another one says everyone bitches about having to pay income tax, and then they wear MAGA hats and celebrate their masters. So MAGA obviously is the acronym for Make America Great Again, the famous Trump campaign slogan. And here we hear by this commentator Jay Nichols the accusation that by wearing MAGA hats, people really submit to their Israeli enslavers because these are really the people who Donald Trump is serving. And then we see here, and this is like one of the great things about social media research, what I said before, that we can really like back up and triangulate the interpretation of things. And like somehow here it's blocked by my screen sharing, but I think you can see it. The last comment says head should be MAGA, right? So replacing the A in MAGA that stands for America with an I for Israel. So conveying this message, basically, Donald Trump betrayed America and is like a nationalistic campaign promises about America for Israel, and it's really about make Israel great again. Again, it's a great example to show how unfolding social media conversations allow us to really decode messages. Here we have this thing like somebody's talking about blah, 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 Zionist total control of the planet. By the way, like I quoted Monika Schwarz-Rizal before, and I really want to quote her again. She said, like at some conference, you know, anti-Semites are really boring because in 2,000 years they didn't invent anything new, and that's precisely what it is. I mean, these things they are basically like written the same way in the protocols of the elders of Zion. It's exact same things just being applied to a new kind of discourse. Then we have here like another mockery of a Trump campaign slogan, America first, but Israel firster, right? So like this America first is being compromised by giving priority to Israel. And then again, we see somebody like, you know, affirming it. So we can triangulate this meaning, Israel first, USA last, confirming that these comments are really meant in this way. Now, here we see a commenter who asserts himself to be like a former Trump voter who identifies himself with white America and is disappointed with Trump. and he's responding to the video that he just saw, and he claims that, like, you know, he's completely shocked to have heard all these things about Donald Trump that he could see in the video. And he writes, how can he be America first? I want to know who gave him his script, who told him to campaign the way he did. How did he know what white America would vote for? What words we loved. Trump is so evil, he made it all up. So he identifies himself explicitly with white America, and as such of a voter who, out of racial concerns, out of a racist sentiment, voted for Donald Trump, and now he feels all betrayed by him because he goes with Israel. And like he follows up on it. He says, like in another comment, I'm so pissed off, we got fooled again. And then here's like really the interesting thing. And okay, now I have a problem because the panel is blocking my view of the screen. How do I get rid of this? Wait, if I stop sharing my screen, no, you know what? Maybe I just hold on. Okay, now I'm making a big mess here. I don't know. Oh no, I don't know what's going on.
Mark, you might be able to drag the panel. Is it on the right side of your screen or the bottom?
Okay. Anyway, I think I can.
Okay.
I can see it, but oh yeah, maybe I can drag it on the right side. That's right. Okay, here we go. Perfect. So let me put it again in full screen mode. Okay, that works perfectly. So there's a commenter called Andres Childs, and he complains to this grieving about like this accusation that Donald Trump has like fooled us, betrayed us, white Americans. And first of all, he starts out by saying, I believe everything this guy points out. And this in this context refers to the movie that was shown and that all the commenters responded to. So he says like, yeah, I agree with him. Like Donald Trump collaborates with the Zionists. But then he says like, I personally believe Trump is a good guy who loves his country. And he knows they're evil, they being the Zionists, the Jews, the Israelis. And then he continues, I believe he's a patriot even with these facts referring to the facts, alleged facts that were presented in the video sequence. And then he says it, of course, these satanic Zionists will be in power. And Trump has to work with the powers that should not be, continue to pray for him. There are truths here, but not all truths have been exposed. So in my opinion, this is like a clear-cut case of theodicy trying to reconcile two ideological prepositions that somehow are contradictory. And he says, yes, it's true, the Zionists are in control and Donald Trump is collaborating with them, and it's bad for white America and it's bad for American nationalism, but it's not really his choice. He doesn't have the choice because these satanic Zionists, these powers that should not be, they're really in charge. And Donald Trump has somehow to cater to the demands in order to make some kind of progress. And I think what's really interesting here, that in order to reconcile his competing positions between racism and white genocide conspiracy theory on the one hand and pro-Israelism on the other hand, he refers to the exact same anti-Semitic stereotypes that the conflict is basically based on. That means we have this conflict that says, oh, the Jews, the Zionists, they control us as conspirators, right? Therefore, like being pro-Israel is terrible because it's just like, you know, submitting to our slaves, enslavers to our masters. But then he uses the same idea to resolve the conflict, so to speak, and to say, well, you know, Donald Trump is not really responsible. It's all about Zionist power. And I think that really shows us the adaptability of anti-Semitism. And like I forgot who pointed it out. Some very smart scholar said that, whose name I just have a blackout. Sorry, but like, you know, anti-Semitism can be adapted so well to so many discourses because in reality it's like really connected to none of them. And that's really what we see here. And it shows like how the same persisting old anti-Semitic stereotypes are not only adopted over and over again to different kind of discourse, but even the same discourse to contradictory positions. and be it like in Nazi narratives to explain capitalism and communism at the same time, or here like to explain why you should like contradict or support Trump at the same time. So I would like to conclude the anti-Semitic belief that Jews, Israel, and Zionism are responsible for so-called globalism, immigration, and other far-right grievances pits Trump's anti-immigration platform and its appeal to race sentiments in opposition to Trump's self-presentation as a pro-Israel figure. Rhetorical strategies that are employed to reconcile this conflict, however, are paradoxically based on the same anti-Semitic premises which underpin it. In other words, the same anti-Semitic fantasies of Jewish control that render Trump's pro-Israelism a betrayal of his anti-immigration attitude is also referred to reconcile these attitudes by diverting responsibility for Trump's action to alleged Zionist manipulation. Thank you very much.